Sentire Media.
Vittoria nostra, non sarai mutilata. Nessuno può infrangerti i ginocchi, né tarparti le penne. Dove corri? Dove sali? La tua corsa è di là dalla notte, il tuo volo è di là dall'aurora. Quel che in Dio fu detto è ridetto, i cieli son men vasti delle tue ali. O victory, you will not be mutilated. No one can break your knees nor clip your wings. Where are you running? Where are you soaring? Your flight is beyond the night, beyond the aurora. It was said and repeated in God, the skies are not as vast as your wings. Hello, you. What you're about to listen to is the first of a multi-part mini-series on Gabriele D'Annunzio, the Italian poet, and his occupation of the city of Fiume. As always, with my co-host for Fascism 100, Matteo Marconi. Enjoy. Well, here we are after a long hiatus, back to Fascism 100, and here we are back with my co-host, Matteo Marconi. Welcome back, Matteo. Great to have you again.
Welcome, everybody.
Today's episode represents a little bit of a digression, because we're going to be talking about what in Italian we call l'impresa di Fiume, so the occupation, or some people say the escapade of Fiume, which makes it sound a bit silly, and maybe in some ways it was silly, but it was a bit more serious than what we would consider today an escapade. But in particular, we're going to be talking about the Italian poet Gabriele D'Annunzio. So, Matteo, why in our discussion of the evolution and the history of fascism do we need to talk about an Italian poet? Why do we feel that Gabriele D'Annunzio and the occupation of Fiume is an important step when talking about fascism?
Gabriele D'Annunzio gave to fascism what fascism didn't have. A cultural background. He created, not for the fascism, he created by himself because he was an exponent of the decadentism, a literary movement that grew in France in the late and late 19th century. This movement and this particular writer give to fascism what fascism didn't have, a cultural background that fascists needed to be welcomed to the intellectual elite and to be sustained by cultural movement.
So sort of cultural legitimization in a certain
yes,
sense.
A sort of legitimization that fascism didn't have, and after D'Annunzio, he gained a lot more of a following by futurism that without D'Annunzio maybe fascism couldn't achieve. So it's very important for fascism to have this writer as a Vate. I don't know what's the English for Vate, but
yeah, it's sort of the name that's given to D'Annunzio as the great poet, il sommo poeta, let's say.
Yes, just like a father, mm-hmm. Just like a.
Yeah, it's very interesting, that distinction. It's kind of the fate that maybe Nietzsche had with Nazism, that, Nietzsche, you can't say Nietzsche was a Nazi at all, but sort of he was then appropriated by Nazism, as D'Annunzio was by fascism. Because we must say, again, you said at the beginning, Matteo, D'Annunzio was not a fascist. Indeed, although initially in his political activity before the Fiume escapade or the occupation of Fiume, he had started off being elected with the right
Yes.
And then he said the famous phrase, "Vado verso la vita," I'm going towards life, and he moved to the left. So he switched alliances in the parliament from left to right. So we can definitely not say he was a fascist, but his thoughts and the impresa di Fiume and the Fiume occupation was taken up by fascism as you said correctly, their cultural legitimization in a certain sense.
Yes, it's a very important argument because very Italian. D'Annunzio was the most Italian of all because he started from left, then he went to right, then he came back to left, then he decided to stay in the middle and to give up at the end. But this important parallel.
Yes, it's the giving up at the end, which is also quite Italian. Yeah,
quite Italian, very Italian. But this in parallel with Nietzsche is very important because if Nietzsche died long before the Nazi came out, because he died in 1900, but Nietzsche D'Annunzio became the background for cultural legitimation for fascism and Nazism. But D'Annunzio in the beginning was he sustained Benito Mussolini, but we can't say he was a real fascist.
Also, there was a bit of an ambiguous relationship between fascism, between Mussolini in particular and D'Annunzio, also because in later life, D'Annunzio also became a bit of an uncomfortable figure for fascism. They sort of put him in forced pension, in a certain sense, forced retirement in one of your favorite places in the world, Matteo, the Vittoriale, which is D'Annunzio's home on Lake Garda. So with fascism, obviously, he was important for fascism, but then he was a bit of an uncomfortable figure for fascism because he didn't really fall in line fully with what Mussolini was doing.
No, he wasn't in line what Mussolini was doing. He's always been a strong anti-German activist.
Yeah.
He hated Germans. He didn't want that Italy could ally with the Germans, with Adolf Hitler in particular. But in the beginning, he gave to fascism the words fascism didn't have.
Yeah, and some of the sort of the symbolism and the rituals, the famous speeches on the balcony, which made Mussolini famous, were started up by D'Annunzio when he was the ruler of the city that in Italian we call Fiume, which is the current day city of in Croatia of
Rijeka.
Yeah, Rijeka. So some of the symbolism, and we could say in a certain sense that D'Annunzio gave to fascism another thing that it needed, which was a secular religion in a certain sense. The cult of the fatherland, the symbolism of the flames of and a certain series of rituals and symbolism that, as you say, fascism was lacking before D'Annunzio. Or let's say we can say that fascism was born in a certain sense. We know that the Fasci di Combattimento were formed in 1990, which was the very year that the Fiume occupation started. So they're parallel in a certain sense.
And D'Annunzio gave the tools to Mussolini to be appealing to the Italians, veterans of the World War I, and to the people who needed something new and something strong, because he talked about Vittoria Mutilata.
Exactly, which was one of the most important concepts which he gave to those who had been, how can we say, disappointed by the results of the First World War. Let's remember that Italy was on the winning side of the First World War, but they felt sort of cheated from the results of the Treaty of Versailles. And so D'Annunzio came up with, in his famous writing, the Preghiera di Sarnaglia, which we basically read from at the beginning. He came up with this concept that you mentioned of the Vittoria Mutilata, the mutilated victory, the incomplete victory, which was then one of the most important marching points, or one of the central concepts that Mussolini used to take power and to sway the opinion of the Italians to his side.
Because in Italy, after World War I, there were hundreds of thousands of
veterans
who fought the war, who died, and who lost their family,
their families
their properties. They felt that their victory was
almost useless in a certain
useless.
They felt cheated by the result because Italy did not get everything that
he deserved.
wanted
She deserved. She or it.
Well, let's say she it. Well, our
And,
mother Italy.
D'Annunzio had a wonderful idea, because talking about vittoria mutilata, scarred victory,
Mutilated victory. Yeah.
You can see a Greek statue that is called Nike of Samothrace, and if you look on the internet, you see this statue, and represent a Greek statue without arms and
head.
Yeah, this imagine represent perfectly what after the World War One. We won, but our victory was
incomplete or not recognized in a certain sense.
In the common sense of that of these years, I don't think we've been mutilated. I think First World War was un'inutile strage.
Yeah, a useless massacre. But however, we did have this sense of having won the war and then having been cheated by this. And so there were certain groups in particular, we're saying, Matteo, the veterans. In particular, we could mention a special elite force which was formed during the war, the Arditi, which would translate to something like the
brave, fearless.
The fearless, exactly, yes, the fearless, who were very prominent in the post-war period. And indeed, if we, then we're going to get down to the actual story of the occupation of Fiume. It was a group of these Arditi who swore, who did the famous giuramento of Ronchi, so this oath of Ronchi, 7 men in particular who swore that they would take Fiume or die trying, but they needed a leader. And when it came time to think about who could be their leader for this endeavor, the first man they thought of and called up was Gabriele D'Annunzio. But before we go there, Matteo, let's talk a bit about the character. This man is a very particular man, very particular character. He was a poet. He was a sort of a very bohemian lifestyle. Let's talk a little bit about his life in general first.
He was a poet, and he wrote a lot of for theater, and he was a sort of a crossroad of different ideas, because he was not conservative in some way. He was an anti-bourgeois
absolutely
writer.
A radical in certain ways in his behavior.
So he gained success even from the left to the right. From the left because he was anti-establishment. He was anti-bourgeois, as you say. And to the right because they celebrated a sort of life... sort
of a religion of the homeland, we could say.
The religion of the
nationalism and
Italianism and as a celebration for the pure act. I don't know how I could translate. Atto puro.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the act in itself, the pure act. For action's
action
sake.
For action. And a sort of celebration of death. Death not for itself, but death for dying for something more important or more
yes, the famous
valuable.
Pro Patria Mori.
Pro Patria Mori, or maybe even dying for love, which is the theme. Lots of his work, of his novels, like Il Piacere. Mm-hmm. You could die for your fatherland, and you could die for love. And these two poles are quite fashionable, even from every point of view. Not only for left, not only for right.
Yeah, sort of universal themes in a certain sense, dying for poetic.
And he was a creator of fantastic spots. Sort of
adverts in a certain sense. And he was very far ahead of his time in sense of marketing. In a certain sense, he understood the value of cinema way before anybody else, and he even sort of how can we say, anticipated the invention of television. He said, this cinema one day we will find a way to fix these images on some kind of frame that people can hang in their houses and then watch over and over again. So he was very much aware of everything new, technological. So he loved technology, he loved the cinema, he loved cars, planes, anything mechanical, anything modern, everything beyond the time, something very much tickled his fancy, we can say.
And if you had the fortune to visit his villa in Lago di Garda, Vittoriale, you can find a theater, a cinema inside his villa. You can find planes, racing cars. It was he celebrated the modernity.
Modernity, yes. He was a great lover of modernity. And one interesting little fact is that Gabriele D'Annunzio was probably one of the very first Italians to be fined for speeding. So he had this love for speed, for exaggeration in all senses. Probably a lot of the time he was under the effect of drugs as well. So
yes, cocaine particularly.
So that obviously helped his speeding. And he was extreme in every way. So surrounded by scandal. He was married. He had 3 children. But he had a whole series of different lovers. Deeply in debt. He had to escape relatively early in his life to Naples. He was originally born in Pescara, so in the current day, or it was already then, it was the region of Abruzzo, which Pescara is the regional seat. And so having to escape, he moved around Italy, ended up escaping to Naples to escape his creditors, found another lover in Naples. And another interesting fact, he was, although obviously nudity and pornography has existed ever since man has been able to draw, with regard to photography, early nude photos and pornographic photos were anonymous, so naked men, naked women, but without being recognizable. Gabriele D'Annunzio was perhaps the first Italian who name and surname can be identified in a naked photo. Indeed, if you're interested, you can Google Gabriele D'Annunzio nude or naked, and you can see a photo with his, let's say, his manly attributes on display, and see him. He wasn't exactly like, say, a Schwarzenegger or an Adonis, but he was
short, very short.
He was a short guy, skinny, but he was not afraid to put it out there in a very physical sense, we can say. So we had this poet which was exaggerated, this bohemian lifestyle in a certain sense, and then as we talk about the endeavor, the occupation of Fiume, we'll see how that translated also into the year or so that Fiume was ruled by D'Annunzio. But at a certain point, he really became obsessed with the whole concept of what in Italian we call irredentismo. So the sort of extending Italy to what could be considered its historical rightful borders. And that was also a very important concept also for fascism, that of irredentismo, so getting back to Italy what Italy deserved to have back in a certain sense. So the concept of irredentismo, getting back what you feel is rightfully yours, brings us to the whole endeavor of Fiume. As we said at the beginning, it was something which sort of Fiume was already in D'Annunzio's sight. He'd already written and spoken about it. So let's say when the invitation came by this group for him to head an actual invasion or an occupation of Fiume, he quite happily took up the invitation. And indeed, so September of 1919, D'Annunzio is in Venice, staying in Venice. He writes, "The die is cast, il dado è tratto," and he sets off for Ronchi, an Italian town in the Veneto area, in his car, in his R4 car, apparently a car that in all of Italy only the king, I believe, had, aside from D'Annunzio or very, very few other people, sets off for Ronchi, and that's where the impresa di Fiume, where the occupation of Fiume starts. Thanks very much for listening. We hope you found that conversation interesting. Next time we'll see how the occupation of Fiume went and how Gabriele D'Annunzio and his ragtag band dealt with the consequences of actually ruling over a city. As always, you can get in touch, hello@ahistoryofitaly.com, and on the same URL, ahistoryofitaly.com, you can click through to our social media and get in touch, or support us from the support page. If you become a Patreon supporter, you can have access to advert-free episodes and extra content. Once again, thank you very much for listening, and until next time, resistete, resist, resist, resist.
Sentire Media.
Hey, podcast producers and show hosts. Do you want to join a podcast network that celebrates all things Italian? At Sentire Media, we understand the allure of Italy and its unique culture. Our devoted team of hosts and producers are all driven by their shared passion for Italy. And we work tirelessly to create the best lifestyle podcasts and content that will whisk you away to the very heart of Italy. With us, you can savor the mouth-watering flavors, get lost in the stories from the past, break down the cultural barriers, and truly immerse yourself in the vibrant traditions of this intoxicating country. If you have a great podcast idea or are already in production and would like to join Sentire Media, head over to sentiremedia.com, that's SENTIRE media.com, and find out how to submit your show.